I'm going to go through the process of burnishing your pot and applying terra sig. It's worthwhile bearing in mind that although if you don't have a wheel, if you can get to the club rooms and use a wheel, it's a lot easier to burnish a pot using a wheel. That is of course assuming that you have a round pot. It's not going to work obviously for every pot. Now, burnishing tools, I'm going to go through all of them one by one, but I've got some crinkly plastic. Now I haven't tried it, but potentially the plastic wrapper from a packet of biscuits or something like that. It needs to be this kind of, the plastic that you used to get the old shopping bags. It's that kind of plastic. I have here a stone. I think it's quartz, I'm not sure, but it's very smooth on one side, makes brilliant burnishing tool. I have a makeup sponge, which is also great for burnishing, and I have, in the first instance, I'm going to use a good old credit card. So let's get going. As I say, my wheel is quite noisy, so just bear with me. I hope you'll be able to hear what I'm saying as I go along. Right. Now, I know that my pot is not centered. I've got a small pot that I've had to balance in various chucks so that I can trim the base because it's got a long neck. So I've trimmed, and now I'm going to use the credit card to do my first layer of burnishing. And all I'm going to do is use the flat part of the credit card against the item and just allow the wheel to do its work. This credit card burnishing obviously is not going to work on something that's not round. So you can see already, well, I hope you can see that the smoothness has already improved. Now, if I go on and put a bit of plastic, so I want a smooth bit of plastic on my finger and use that. Now I'm burnishing this without any terra sigiliata. This is just at the trimming stage, so it's leather hard. Now, do you see the shine, the sheen that you're getting on that clay? Now we're going to use a makeup sponge. Burnishing stone. Now, personally, I think that I get the best result on this pot with the plastic. My burnishing stone is fabulous for items that are not a cylindrical or rounded side shape. So I'm going to go over it once more with the plastic. So I've now got a really smooth surface. Okay. Now applying, so burnishing with the terra sigiliata is exactly the same process. I'm going to allow this to dry a bit, and then I'm going to come back and apply the terra sig. Demonstrating the terra sig. Now this pot is not quite dry enough for applying terra sig, but in order to demonstrate the process I'm going to go ahead anyway, and I'll just use a hairdryer to dry it off so that I can show you the burnishing side of it. So first things first, I've got my terra sig and I've got my mop brush. Now the reason why we use a mop brush is because it holds an enormous amount of product, of your liquid. So you don't want to have to keep taking your when you're applying terra sig on the wheel, you don't want to have to keep loading up your paintbrush again. You want a really smooth coating to go on. It's not so important when you're putting terra sig onto a piece and you're not using the wheel, but the one thing you do need to be aware of is making sure that you have a good quality brush and that the brush is not going to be leaving hairs behind, because even though the hairs will burn out, they will leave a mark on the surface of your pot. So I'm going to load up my brush and I'm just going to squeeze off the excess, and so I've put a nice smooth coating all the way around. I've been very careful to make sure I don't have any drips or runs. And then I'm going to use the hairdryer to dry it off a bit. I don't want to dry it until it's absolutely bone dry. I just want to dry it enough that when I run my burnishing material over the surface, it doesn't snag. So let's give this a try and see if it's dry enough. Okay, this is still, can you see that? Snagging. So I'm going to dry it a bit more. To judge whether or not the terra sig was snagging. Now I can do that because just running my finger along the side, I'm not going to leave a fingerprint. But at this stage you want to be very careful not to actually put your fingers onto the pot. If you want to pick your pot up when it's got terra sig on it, put gloves on or use a piece of plastic to pick it up. Okay, so using my piece of plastic, I'm going to burnish. And what I'm aiming for is to get a really nice sheen on the surface of my pot. Now I've seen people use all sorts of different things for burnishing. Something I've seen used is something like an automotive mitt. It's a microfiber, and it just means that you can burnish larger areas fairly quickly if it works. Some of them work, some of them don't, and I still feel like I get a better finish using plastic. Smoother surface, and to me, I think I have a deeper sheen. Right, onto my second coat. Remember, every time you're going to use terra sig, stir it up to make sure that your particles are suspended well and evenly throughout the liquid. And second coat. Once again, being careful that I don't have any drips or runs. Now you'll find if you're applying terracage to bone dry or nearly bone dry wares that the terracage dries really quickly anyway. You won't need to use a hairdryer to dry it off. So I've got a really good depth of shine coming along now on this pot. So I'm going to continue doing this for between 3 and 5 coats. It's up to you really whether you stick with 3 or whether you go up to 5. I quite like the process of applying and burnishing, so I tend to go with 5. Right, so I've now finished burnishing my pot, and when I remove it from the chuck, you can very clearly see the difference between the body where I've terracaged and the part of the neck where I haven't. Now, if I want to continue and put terracage on that neck, I could do that on the wheel, but it probably wouldn't work terribly well. So I'll just do it by hand. And in order to do it by hand, I would just hold on to the bowl of my bottle with plastic, or I'd put a glove on to protect my terracage surface from getting fingerprints, and then just use either another piece of plastic, my burnishing stone, microfiber cloth, whatever you choose to use, what you find works best for you, and burnish it up. So that's the basis of applying terra sigiliata onto your pots. This is not necessarily the shape of pot that I would put into a shared firing because the neck is vulnerable to breakage. This is the kind of pot that I would fire if I was doing a sagger firing on my own. In a shared kiln environment where we're going to have many participants with a parcel of items being sagger fired, I would suggest that you make something that's fairly robust and is not likely to blind. And that's the finished pot. Beautiful shiny surface.